What were we eating 300,000 years ago and that we should be replicating now?
The primary thing is not the what, but the how. One of the questions I get all the time after I get done speaking or people come for a class or whatever is, should humans eat bread? Or should adult humans consume dairy? Those questions are actually silly. I understand why people are asking them, but it's the wrong question. When you say bread to me, do you mean Wonder Bread? Or do you mean a loaf of wild, slow, long fermented sourdough bread? When you say dairy, do you mean ultra pasteurized skim milk? Or do you mean raw fermented dairy from this amazing farm down the road? They are completely different foods, and I have completely different answers for the two of them. In fact, raw fermented dairy is replicating all of the biological processes that went on inside of our bodies when we were infant humans, perfectly designed to consume dairy. Fermented vegetables are replicating a lot of the natural biological processes that are going on inside of things like ruminant animals when they're eating tough vegetable materials. A process that our ancestors have figured out over literally millions of years of experimentation to make food as safe and absolutely nourishing as it can possibly be. It should form the foundation of everything that we're eating. When we introduced animals into our diets 3.5 million years ago, we did so in the form of just meat and a little bit of marrow because we were scavenging. At 2 million years ago, we see our biggest jump in body and brain size, and it correlates with two major technological innovations. One is fire, which is very powerful, but the other is hunting technology. And for the first time ever, 2 million years ago, we could take animals down at will. And because we were the hunter, we had first access to every part of that animal. Not just the meat that was left behind by other predators, but the entirety of that animal, the most nutrient-dense bioavailable parts, the blood, the fat, and the organs. It is when we introduce the entire animal into our diets that we see the most massive explosion in body and brain size that we've ever seen in our evolutionary past. And I am confident it's because of that massive influx of incredibly bioavailable, nutrient-dense foods. And what we also know is we don't see much biological change between 3.4 million years ago and 2 million years ago. There isn't this major jump in brain size because a little bit of meat's in their diet or they get a lot bigger. They stay pretty similar. There are some changes, but nothing statistically significant. The biggest change happens at 2 million years ago when, again, we introduce fire, and I think even more importantly, we introduce hunting. And when we introduce hunting, that means not only can we take an animal down at will, but most importantly, we're now sitting with the entirety of that animal in front of us. We're not the scavengers anymore. We're the predators. This is the first time we become hunter-gatherers. And because of that, we can now feast on the blood, the fat, and the organs, and then also eat the meat. That's the biggest difference in my mind. That's the whole animal approach. This was such a big deal. Not only do we see the appearance of species like Homo erectus and Homo ergaster, which have much bigger brains than their previous counterparts, but if you're tracking their brain growth within the same species over million years after that, it's increasing as it goes. Powerful. That whole animal approach is not only ancestrally correct, so you're eating the entire animal, and we've done so for so long. The fact that we're only eating chicken breast now or ribeyes now is a new phenomenon, or some would say a step too far back, right, to 3.5 million years ago. But it also checks all these other incredible boxes that I think are very important in our diets. It is more ethical to eat the entire animal. So I got a thumbs up thing. I don't know where that came from. Right now, in a modern American grocery store, 55% of a pig and 50% of a cow by weight end up on the shelves. So that means to the typical modern American consumer, when we kill an animal, only half of it is available to go into our diets, which doesn't sit right with me. When you look at hunter-gatherer groups, especially people like the Sami in Scandinavia, when an animal is killed, like a reindeer there, they're eating upwards of 96, 97, 98% of that animal is used to nourish themselves and their families and their community. That sits a lot better with me from an ethical perspective. From a sustainability perspective, same sort of thing. We have all these, some of them accurate, some of them not so accurate, calculations on, okay, well, to raise this cow, it takes this much food and this much water, and you only get this much in return. Well, all those calculations are thrown to hell when you actually are eating the entire animal. All of those calculations immediately overnight change without even doing anything different with how you've raised that animal or fed that animal, just how you've used that animal. And then the final piece, which I think is also very important, is the economic part of it, right? These parts of the animal, the liver, heart, kidney, spleen, blood, fat, are a lot cheaper than ribeyes and filet, right? From the consumer perspective, more economical, but also for the rancher or the farmer. You have a small rancher, a small farmer doing an incredible job raising these animals, caring for these animals. You have an incredible abattoir that's harvesting them and a butcher that's cutting them properly. You now have a market for putting more money directly into their pocket for the same work they're already doing. I mean, that is a win-win all the way around. Everything changes with a full whole animal approach.
You did say something very interesting question that I think kind of may be a linchpin to this conversation, which is, well, the purpose of our species is to propagate. And so maybe a sign of whether your food systems is working or your lifestyle is working is, can your population populate? And we are seeing a huge decline in people's ability to get naturally pregnant. That is probably an indicator that these modern methods, maybe they're not working and they're not conducive towards humanity's longevity.
There's 2 points I want to make very quickly, and I completely agree. One is there's a few points I want to make.
Say them all. Say them all.
One of the definitions of domestication is that you take a species out of its natural environment and put it in a culturally created environment. In that culturally created environment, that species genetically changes. When I say culture created, I mean like human created environment. Over time, that species genetically changes in response, quite often to the point where it can no longer survive on its own back in the wild. An example would be, we take these wild plants out of the environment, we start caring for them, we start watering them, we start feeding them, we start protecting them from other competing plants. Maybe we keep other animals away from eating it before it grows, we put a fence around it, whatever. That's domestication. Same thing with animals. We take these wild animals and we put them in a culture-created environment, genetically change over time. Eventually, they're domesticated animals. That means the environment that they're responding to from an evolutionary perspective has changed. It's no longer this wild environment. I mean, certainly wild environments change. We have an asteroid hit, we have a climatic change, whatever it is, those are changes in the natural environment. But now we've put them in an environment that we're controlling and they're responding to that and genetically changing over time. Most of the domesticated animals we think about, like from a farm, started to become domesticated somewhere between 10,000 years ago. So things like cattle and that sort of thing, right? The dog, through what we think is a co-domestication event, happened at least 35,000 years ago. So well predating anything like horses and cows and that sort of thing. But my answer to what was the first domesticated animal is us. We started to put ourselves in a culturally created environment the moment that we started making tools and using those tools to feed ourselves. We were actually living, existing outside of our own biology by creating these tools, and we weren't relying on our teeth anymore solely or our digestive tract solely. We can now get food and start to chop up food that we never had access to before because we created that tool. And it became even more pronounced when we created things like fire to not only cook our food, but to change the amount of light we had access to in a day, or our microclimate, keep ourselves warm when it was cold. And all of the clothing, all of these technologies that we've created allowed us to create literally this artificial human environment that now we are adapting to. Now that includes things like glyphosate and ultra processed food. So the difference about evolution now than 6,000 or 6 million years ago, we're not just responding to this naturally changing environment, genetically changing and evolving in relationship to that. We are obviously still changing because of that. Our gene pool's changing, but even more pronounced is we're changing because of the culturally created environment that we have created as well.
If you enjoyed the clip from the podcast, make sure to check out the next video up here, or head over to watch the full episode down here. And before you go, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Come on. Yeah, thanks for watching.